Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham. Yeah, so it's birthday day. Woo, woo, woo. Alright, it's not so bad, okay? I'm not dying of something. As I have periodically been doing, this year. So that's good. Yeah. Ew. Does cause you to reflect on a life, lived, but who knows? It could have been better, yeah, and certainly could have been a lot worse. So about a trillion little decisions made, and you wobble through, and you end up here. And so that's where I have ended up. I've ended up here, making a video. So that's the story. It's what you glean out of this thing. So one thing that, I've sort of noticed is I could argue is in my youth, I was, chasing life, trying to grab hold of something, precious, that I thought I might have needed. And, then as you get, old, all you're doing is, you're running. You're just saying, how can I stay ahead of the murderer that's chasing me? So it's a different kind of perspective. And you're just saying, though, perspective, I shouldn't be controlled by such things. I should be, precise in my calculation of every moment of my life, and that's the trick. It's just you can't be precise. There's no, it's all too push and pull. There's just too much noise, the psychological noise, the how do I feel, how do I feel, how do I feel. That's just so irritating, because depending on how you feel is going to decide, whether if you go bowling, whether you bowl a 300 or you bowl a 30, isn't going to have much to do with anything other than, how is your, all the physiological crap, how well is it working? You got the right hormones and the right levels and all of that kind of crap. So it's pretty arbitrary, and I don't know why that's there's nothing over there. There should be something there. That's kind of strange. Anyway, so it's, what comes to mind, okay, you're saying, well, what have I gleaned out of all of this time? And they're just little things, where you say, okay, this was a big idea. And I'm not, there's lots of big ideas in terms of recognizing how the physical universe works and evolution and, understanding you're a biological machine and all that crap. But the real brain game is recognizing that you're a reaction machine. And depending on how much time you take to compose your reaction and how many inhibitions, how many light posts there are, how many guiding posts, how many road signs there are in your brain that say things like be careful and step lightly, don't overreact, count to 10, all this little bullshit that are these little psychological gimmicks to try to help you not be reckless or sloppy in your reaction to existence. And that's all you can do is react. You can't act, ever. Your whole system is just a reactionary system. It's a reflexive system. It's as simple as the knee jerk. The hammer hits and your brain jerks. And it's a bunch of little jerks. And all you can do is recognize that, okay, I have to have jerks in there, like this sentence. And it has to be a permanent sentence that says something like, you can't control what they do. You can only control what you do. I mean, how you react is all there is. And so, is that power? Well, No, you're still reacting, and it's still the mental environment that's going to decide your actions. So you're not really controlling anything, but what's being controlled is the understanding, the model that's in your head of how to live, so to speak. And, the little key statements, the past is gone, the present is too small to worry about, and so all there is the future. So those simple ideas that, that you are what you have, what's stuck to you. What kind of ideas have stuck to you will define what you are, how you reflect the world. And has nihilism stuck to you? Has selfishness stuck to you? Has some notion that it's you against them? And all the ways you could describe that. So I did receive one of those emails this week. I get a few where somebody is basically saying, I'm going to kill myself. Life sucks. Blah 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 blah. I don't see any point. Da 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 da. And I guess they're wanting me to react in some way, where I really don't have any. I don't have any practical advice, in the sense that I don't even have it quite figured out how I'm going to, get myself out of this gracefully. So, you just have some vague, plan, but it's vague, and I have to work on that, of course. And so I can't give any, useful mechanical advice, and so that's a good thing because it's probably against the law to do that anyway. And then all you can do is make the argument that well, this particular person wasn't describing themselves being tortured. They weren't like every day is horrific and I can't stand it and it's I'm sick of feeling sick and all of that stuff. It's more like, oh yeah, the economy sucks and you got to work and you get nothing out of it and it's all futile and it's all depressing. Well, okay, that's not pleasant. That's bad. But I don't think it merits any urgency. So again, it's like you have to think about this and say, well, is there anything to hang around for? And obviously, I would argue the cause is worth hanging around for. So. Well, that's not the one I wanted. So I put up the wrong window. Oh, so anyway, sorry. There's all little kinds of bugs in computering. Yeah, that's really buggy. It's really broken is what that is. I guess the computer's going to crash. Or something like that. So, anyway, sorry for the distraction. I just don't know what that blank screen thing is. I gotta get rid of that. So we'll do this until I fix that. Anyway, so I probably can get rid of this now, right? Yeah, probably distracting. I probably should use it in the physics videos or something. Some way. I got it really cheap. Anyway, I get everything really cheap. I don't get it. I don't buy anything unless it's really cheap. But anyway, all right. So, so the argument is that right now we're creating the future, and the future is going to be just as real for the people living in the future as it is real for the people living now. So, it's maybe not going to be you, but it doesn't matter that it's not particularly you, right? I mean, it just matters that it's one of these things, being a machine in a world that can't understand and can't deal with and can't find anything to make it worthwhile, make it make sense. Let's just put it that way. Make it make sense. See the productivity in it, and especially when it again, another one of the observations is it's really just a janitor's job. You're just doing this kind of unpleasant work. It's just cleaning up shit. And shit that shouldn't be on the ground, fixing things that shouldn't be broken, trying to fix things that shouldn't be broken. And, you know, it's very unrewarding. You know, you're not building, you know, you're repairing. And, you know, and it's broken by reckless vandalism, you know, by people who just didn't give a crap, you know, about graffitiing on it, and, you know, the fact that it wasn't going to be durable, and that it's all, you know, cheap and crappy. And certainly that's the world we're born into. I mean, I was born into a cheap, crappy world, and the world now, I would argue, is just so much more cheap and crappy because the people are cheaper. Yeah, they're cheaper and crappier. You know, because they're raised by a higher majority of the people having kids are reckless morons, frankly. And that's just the truth. People who give it some thought are, you know, they're paused by the recognition that what if, and what if, and what if, and what if. Am I in any way capable of handling all those what ifs? The autism stuff, the, you know, being able to monitor your kid, make sure he doesn't drown in the pool or some other kind of bullshit. There's so much to this raising a human being. Can I prevent him from hanging around with the wrong crowd and getting into a bunch of bad acts and having some bad habits and bad ideas and all of that kind of shit? And they figure, yeah, okay, I can figure out that, you know, maybe I'm not ready to be able to do this experiment because I can't conceive of how I could have the skills to do it. So the more mindful you are of that, I would argue, right, the more mindful you are of the complexity of the job, the more obvious it becomes to somebody with an intelligence that nobody's qualified. You know, nobody knows exactly what to say in every circumstance and exactly how to behave to create a beneficial psychological impact on the little creature, the little monster you're playing with. And so what you're going to turn it into. You know, and you know, you can't know. And so people with a brain are apprehensive in playing the game because they don't know whether they're going to make a monstrosity or something that will be productive and happy and all of that crap. So, yeah, so only slobs or bums and morons and pigs, cretins have kids. Okay, thoughtful people don't. Because again, it's just so full of booby traps, and you know, there's so many ways for it to go wrong, and so few ways for it to really go right. I mean, so few. You take 100 kids, you know, and you write, you know, you see the narratives, and you're going to find, oh, these aren't going to be great stories. They're not going to have great endings. You know, 5% or so are going to end up killing themselves one way or another pretty early in their existence, and you know, and the rest are going to be, you know, divorced. All kinds of crap is going to happen, and all kinds of shit. And you know, by the time they're 50 years old, they say 50% of them are going to have some kind of disability, you know, significant one. Yeah, that doesn't, you know, it's not very charming. And you're trying to say that you're going to shoot the arrow straight and get the bullseye. And so again, the bullseye is the small thing. Okay, you know, all the other possibilities are the big, huge thing. And you know, a sensible person realizes, well, you don't bet on that. You know, you bet when, you know, all you have to do is hit the big part, and hitting the little part will get you into trouble. You find an experiment to do where the odds are exactly the opposite, where you have to be an idiot to miss the target. You know, you have to do something really stupid to end up in the mess or the quicksand. You know, and so, you know, that's, I'd say, you know, there's a substantial number of people who are recognizing that, and they're not having kids, but the problem is they're still the morons, and the morons, you know, have 4 kids or 5 or 10, and you know, the conscientiousness of 10 couples is used up by one of the reckless pigs, and that's the liability. And but even so, like I said, for the civilized world, it's a hard trend away from baby making as a fun way to exist. Yeah, it's okay. So most people aren't seeing that as, big fun. They're seeing it as big trouble. And so that's the only bright side, is that behavior-wise, the argument is winning, that it's not a useful or good thing to do to have kids. And again, they don't even have to be thinking about the use to the future. They just have to think about the use to themselves. And that's a good enough incentive. Now, it'd be better if they understood how it's downright evil to make babies. But you take what if they're doing the right thing. So doing it for the wrong reason in this case isn't too bad. But it's better for the future that the people making our civilization would talk this rational talk about how life isn't all that, and the fact is you are going to be murdered in the end, and everything that you have will be taken from you, and often it'll be taken in little pieces, and you will endure years or perhaps even decades in a substantially deprivated condition, just hoping for little bits of relief. And that should frighten anyone reasonable. Yeah. Alright, so take a pause and see where else I can go. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, no, there's really no happy stories to tell. And so, I wish I could, say something fun, but there's just nothing fun or funny. It's just a travesty that people think they're winning. I'm back. So I was thinking about thinking, and how it would be interesting to see what brains could do the more time they have to make a decision. So even making this video, let's say that for every video I made, I had a year to think about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. I'd still be stuck with the idea that, okay, you could write a script and say, okay, here's a very good script, and then you have to read it with some sort of naturalness, and that I'm not any good at. So that probably wouldn't work for me. But just in the idea of getting it in my head and even maybe memorizing it or whatever. If you had a full year, to compose your arguments and try to make them, perfect. Whether it be any different or not, does it really make a difference? Because all you're really doing is changing, the subtleties of the, verbiage, the composition, and not really the meaning of any of it, probably, because the statements are themselves kind of just statements. It's better to think about it. The longer you think about doing something, you're probably better off, just because you can run the model and see how it plays out and see, is this a target where I'm again shooting an arrow and trying to hit the little tiny thing, or is this a game where I'm, all I have to do is worry about hitting the little tiny thing, because most of the space is safe. And that's the more time you take to consider what your real motivation is. Are you well motivated, or are you selfishly motivated? That kind of stuff. It all, it's pretty important. That sandwich thing is bugging me. It really shouldn't be broken. There should be an image there. Annoying. Anyway, so yeah, so it's really just making this argument that I've sort of been saying for years, is that yes, this is what all you're supposed to do, is try to get everything right, try to make right decisions. And that requires that you think about it, and also requires that you have some sort of foundational understanding that's somehow reasonable in terms of recognizing the simple things, the do unto others kind of crap, do unto the future, okay, as you wish the past did unto you. That would be maybe a good phrase, because we're, again, making the future. We're creating the noise that it's going to have to, the sound that it's going to have to listen to, so to speak. We're building the traps that they're going to fall in, all of that kind of stuff. We put bad wiring in their house, and in the future it's going to burn their house down. That kind of crap is pretty much a realistic metaphor, analogy for what we're doing here every day, in terms of existing and trying to make positive contributions. So that's the impulse, right? And so I can do that on this little scale of saying hi to the neighbor and doing them a favor here or there, or somebody, if I can be helpful, I will be helpful. I'm trying to do that on this internet thing, but obviously because people have some different perspective about how the system works, they think I'm playing football on their soccer field, and vice versa, and that just creates all of this conflict, because I can't see them as being honest players trying to do the right thing, and apparently they can't see me as doing that. And I guess the argument is clearly I think they're cheating, okay? That they're not being honest in appraising my motivations or appraising the reasonableness of my actions and my conversation, because frankly I have thought about it my whole life, and I can't see any other alternative, but to talk this kind of depressing rhetoric about how you're really missing the game you're in, and you're cheating the future by pretending it doesn't matter, pretending that, well, we can all just fuck around and fuck up and whatever, and it's not going to make any difference, when of course it always makes a difference. You just can't make this argument that nobody has to show up for the war and you still win the war. That doesn't happen. So it's kind of silly to say, well, some of us don't have to do anything, because we can't know which one of us don't have to do anything. We don't know who would have been the hero if he was properly drafted into the war. All of that kind of crap would have saved the day. Would have made the difference. So you can't know any of that. So you can't make this assumption that it's okay if we don't pay much attention to protecting the future from chaos and waste and torture because of recklessness. And that's all, just reckless, stupid, ignorant, dumb behavior. So, where does that lead? So the conflict thing is the interesting one. That's the one I'm dealing with all the time, is trying to understand the aggressiveness of the people who oppose these simple arguments I'm making about waste and pointlessness. And they're so aggressive in defending stuff that I was saying. What's their reasonable argument? Do they really believe there's a God? Do they really believe that there's going to be some circumstance where this playing this game of being a biological need machine is actually a useful thing to be? Some kind of thing that's hatched in need and it's got all these dependencies. It needs a nipple to suck on, it needs this, it needs temperature, it needs this, it needs all this stuff, or it feels crappy and unhappy. And so it's all very high maintenance. Why would you make these high maintenance machines? What role can they possibly play except to be under maintained? I mean, the only real prospect is that they're going to end up under maintained, that their needs aren't going to be satisfied, and all you're going to do is create a bunch of little tears and grief and pain and suffering and torment, and you're not going to have anything to show for it except, you know, something with a you know, some sort of blissful appearance that doesn't realistically mean anything, because the bliss is the default state. Frankly, it's what you would have if you didn't create the negative in the first place. So the whole thing doesn't make much sense. It's just chasing tails and, you know, circular crapola. It doesn't produce anything. And in its best circumstance, all you can do is do the zero-sum thing. All you can do is get back to the neutral ground. You're never going to gain anything positive, and all you can do is try to struggle to stay out of the negative. And, you know, that's all your life is, you know, balancing your meager checkbook. And it's always going to be meager. And then again, in the circumstance where these people are arguing with me, these are people who haven't died yet, and they're pretending dying isn't an issue. It's just not even a problem. It's not, you know, what's the big deal? Everybody does it, so it must be a great thing to do because everybody does it. That's almost their attitude. It's, you know, it must be a really fun thing to do because everybody else is doing it. Yeah, right, sure. What a pile of crap. So, I mean, obviously it would be better if we could have all these conversations with people who were dead, you know, had already lived and died, and then saw that, you know, and saw maybe a year or two of the world after their death, and realized that what's the point, you know, because these next versions aren't doing any better than the old version was doing. They're even worse, frankly. They're distracted by, you know, the silliest crap. I mean, you know, commercials are getting dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber. You know, it's like you can almost sell anything to these imbeciles. And yeah, so what's a dead person to think? You know, it was worth it because this is the brilliant world they created out of our being buried. You know, this is the fertilizer for these ugly plants. You know, there isn't any exceptional. You can't even find a character to run for president of the United States, frankly. You can't find somebody who's clean enough and decent enough and smart enough, you know. And so all you get is a, you know, giant douche shit sandwich. You just get, you know, that's all humanity's creating is shitty monsters. You know, and that's a pretty pitiful statement about humanity and its progress. So then, you know, and I could also just make the argument that most people are now, you know, if they aren't actively using some drug, you know, to fuck with their perspective to make their life edible, they're doing it with this virtual mechanisms, this internet thing, you know, that provides them with any kind of, you know, it'll scratch any itch. So you know, any silly impulse, any silly fantasy, any silly delusion, you just go on the internet and you can find somebody who'll you know, help you out. You know, and so people are just living in these virtual games and these, you know, this virtual existing in a completely almost voyeuristic, you know, fantasy reality. And so instead of fixing problems in the real world, they're occupied, you know, trying to earn enough tokens so they can get a longer spear, you know, to go stab the bad guys with, so they can win and steal the gold. the virtual fun. You know, I'm just saying, as an image, it's a pitiful image. So I had that of myself, when I was playing Tomb Raider, years ago, and I just got this, moment where I looked at myself, from above, so to speak, and said, "What is this? I just spent 6 hours, doing this bullshit. How could I be more unproductive? I mean, I might as well just be a rock in the yard or something. I mean, it's just you're not connected to the world in any way. You're just lost in your own little brain delusion, and what good does that do in the future? So, or the neighborhood, or some hungry cat, or anything. It's not doing anything any good, and it's not even doing yourself any good. Because again, you're just chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing a solution you'll never have, and it'll never be that gratifying. I remember the end monster was this giant spider thing, and it was almost impossible to kill. I mean, you had to jump around for 20 minutes shooting it, before it killed you. And it was like, it must have taken me 2 weeks. And by the time I finally killed it, it was like anticlimactic, because it's like, oh yeah, this was a lot of work. It was like all this wasted energy, and it isn't all that, right? It's just, oh yeah, I won finally. It just wasn't enough of a party. If the computer could have thrown me a Snickers bar or something, maybe that would have made it worth it or something. But it was, there was no prize. There was no, just saying. All right. So I think that's enough gibberish for a while. So I shall be back again and try some more. So that's what I do. I try. Even though Yoda says there is no try. I think there is. So I do it. Yeah. All right. I think I'm back. Can you hear me? Can you understand me? And so, see, that's sort of what this is like, is, because people have all these different ways of perceiving this elemental function of being alive on planet Earth, in this huge field of biological organisms interacting, and are you seeing it for what it is? So are you speaking English, so to speak, or are you in some other language? Is your brain interpreting through other prisms of, religions, fantasies, stories, okay, that don't have anything to do with the real mechanical system, which is, again, just this complexity of chemistry. The molecule is really doing the evolving. You're just the plaything it's using to test the model. And and yeah, it's really interesting, that we're alive, and your brain is synthesizing this whole adventure you're having. But are you playing the game, or is the game playing you? Are you in the real game? Or are you in just one of those, delusions that the game imposes on most of the machinery, right? I mean, all the other animals are so trapped being one thing: cat, dog, bird, fish. They they can't get out of the role they're obligated to play. So if you watch a lot of those animals, you can't tell, Bill from Jill from Fred. I mean, they're all doing the same kind of crap. And, all you can see really is that, well, that guy's horny, or that one's this, or, some little personality difference. But they're all stuck being, machines, completely motivated by these impulses of their biology, of their physiological condition, their mood. And of course we step way above all of that, and can have a running theme of purpose and objective and ambition, and but sometimes that just becomes, because of the competitive part, it just becomes a game to play in itself. The game of, let's talk about reality, and then that game becomes, well, how many views did my video get? How many people did I convince? How many, and you're just, again, playing a game, okay, where you're turning the big game into some little personal game that'll gain you some sort of gratification in terms of saying, oh, I did my job, I won the day, or some kind of crap. In your little game of just being a fish chasing particles of food, just swimming around, go, oh yes, I'll take that one. Oh, no, I don't like that one. Oh, there's one over there, I'll go get it. And you're just chasing your little nuggets of I win crap. And obviously our bigger, more expansive capacity to model and put a filter over all of our impulses and our desires and all of that crap, and moderate them, find the best piece of ourselves and the worst piece of ourselves, and try to reconstruct the machinery to function in a better way, where we're tweaking our own wiring based on a program that says tweaking wiring can work. Doing some thinking, coming up with an idea, a plan even, works. If you're going to be a thief, you have to figure out how do I get in the door, and then I want to be, is it got to see a security system? Are there motion detectors? And then how do I open the safe, and how do I do? You have to have a plan. And that's what we can do, is plan. To satisfy some bigger ambition, to achieve something better. But again, it can just be converted into, you just want the banana that's in the safe, and so you can just convert it into nothing. Or somebody's going to pay you for the banana that's in the safe. And, and so it all gets tainted, by the fact that we always have to play it as a monkey's adventure story. It always has to be converted into a story the monkey will read, and so or be interested in participating. Our intelligence has to seduce the visceral game player into being interested in playing the game, the right game, the better game. And yes, I struggle with this often, because it's sort of unyielding. Yeah. So anyway, getting back to the perspective in terms of your life story and your progression through your life, I guess that's something that has changed, is that I didn't have that kind of big picture focus. I just knew the small picture was broken. I didn't really conceive that there was any capacity to fix what was broken. Didn't really think of it in terms of, well, people are just silly, and if you could do something to stop making people that are silly, then it would be a much better world if there wasn't silly people in it. So beyond just having that simple notion that the problem wasn't me, the problem was them, so that was something I did draw that conclusion. So it was a weird, in a way it was very strange, because I had a intense sense of insecurity, but it wasn't because I thought I was broken. And so, it was two-sided. In one sense, you couldn't help but see your lack of capacity to win any awards as being failure. But then inside my head, I knew this is a stupid game. I don't want to win awards at this game anyway. I don't want to be a winner in that game. So, so there was a, it was a strange way to live. Being two things, being comfortable with yourself, but uncomfortable with the world. You see, I can't say, that, it wasn't exactly like that. Because, yes, part of me was feeling imperfect and insufficient to the task. Because I didn't have great, I didn't have great literacy skills. I wasn't good at anything, and particular, and so I always felt a little underperforming. So I guess some of it was real. Well, anyway, enough of my psychology. The argument is the difference between us and the simple idea of just conveying these simple themes about what it is to be human and alive, and what role you're supposed to play, and how you're supposed to do it in a way that's comfortable enough, gratifying enough. It's enough frosting on the cake. It's you don't need a big cake. You just need a little cupcake with a candle or something like that. You just, it's not, you can make yourself low enough in your expectations, hungry enough that, a simple meal will do. You don't, you're not chasing something more than just satisfactory. Yeah. And then you can devote the rest of whatever capacity you have to the project, the bigger project of, trying to understand how you can help the future, how you can be an influence in the present that will in some way change the behavior enough to cause some positive realization in humanity, in its memes, in its projected values that aren't just about capitalist ambitions and shiny buildings and nonsense, frankly, and it's more about elevating our intelligence and our passion to understand the world we exist in, and not just be little kids playing silly little games. Sort of that growing up thing. It's just an argument defending the idea that we should mature into devices that aren't controlled by all this emotional crap. So, in that sense, I'm a very poor example because I'm easily triggered, into being a reactionary, and, that's my bad. But ideally, we all want to be careful and thoughtful speakers and describe accurately what we have learned through thousands of years of trial and error, and try to convey the best of what we can glean out of an existence. So, I can't say I've learned a lot since I was 30. A lot of detail, but the overall impression is still the same. The smell of it is still the smell of it. I mean, it's still, the substance of the conclusions that there is no God. All right, there's no creator. There's no mechanism that's doing anything on purpose, and that this is just an evolutionary process of stuff sticking to stuff. And as stuff sticks to stuff, it gets more and more stuff stuck on it, kind of thing. And that's the same thing with our intelligence. We're just building it little pieces at a time. And unfortunately, it's just corroded by these silly notions of shoving hobgoblins and holy ghosts and other crap into the story, And then the science itself, that's why I have the draft physics channel, is doing the same thing. It's just, you know, instead of proving and going where the evidence leads, you know, it's aggrandizing and storytelling and trying to make it into a bigger and more interesting story than just being robots and deterministic machines that need to be poked, you know, that need to have themselves be created by exposure to information and knowledge. You know, we all, you sort of have to experience it, right? It's like all the life lessons. You're saying, okay, well, you can tell a kid not to do something stupid, but telling them doesn't work. You know, you have to give them knowledge of it. They have to see it, and they have to see it in some sort of personal way. So, you know, it's almost like you can show them car crashes from being a drunk, and it doesn't have much of an impression. You know, it's not until they have their first accident or the first time it's their fault. The first time, you know, those kind of things are the things that last, you know, that leave a permanent dent in your identity and make you appreciate, you know, you can't play this way. I guess I sort of had that, you know, as one example was, you know, I used to, when I was working, I, you know, drove home at night, 2 or 3 in the morning, and after a, you know, a long 12-hour kind of day, and you know, and I'd fall asleep, you know, driving, and you know, it's just a fact that somehow my muscle memory kept me on the road because it was the same road every night. So somehow, but I mean, I wasn't there. There was points where I would just say, "Shit, where was I?" Because I wasn't here, you know, sitting in this car seat steering this car. I just wasn't. And so, yeah, that happens a couple of times, and you just realize how, well, this could all go to hell, right? I mean, I can't pretend this is a good plan, right? It doesn't have the look of a good plan anywhere. You know, it just looks like a good plan if you want to drive into a tree. You know, so you have to do something. You have to change something. You better fix this because this is unacceptably stupid. You know, but it leaves a lasting impression. So for the rest of your life, you're going to remember putting a tennis ball behind your seat and forcing yourself to be uncomfortable so you can stay awake. You know, that kind of thing. You're gonna remember that you know, that's part of life, is learning something, realizing you were not appreciating the importance of something, and you were doing something that was just dumbass stupid. Yeah, so that's the stuff that really sticks. And you know, so it's hard for me to make this do this through conversation. It's hard for me to give you that experience. You know, I can't just, you know, throw some words at you and you recognize that, oh, I've gotten it all wrong and I've made these horrible mistakes in terms of my life, and figuring out that somehow it's about me when it's no, it was about my wife and it was about my kids and it was about all these other people trying to get through their life. And I didn't do them any favors, and I actually was a parasite and sucked their blood and gave them a disease and, you know, ruined them, and, you know, all of that stuff that you have to be careful not to do. And in the big picture, again, the argument is, you know, this chaos is going to continue to exist until people recognize that this waste and chaos is the enemy, and we have to have some sort of respect for these absolute truths, you know, and we have to start disrespecting the fantasies, you know, the people who are pretending they can escape reality with the silly delusions of their God or their singularity or their wormhole or whatever the bullshit is. That's cheating the future, because that nonsense isn't going to help the future any. Yeah. It's all we're playing for. You know, tomorrow, you know, the day after tomorrow, a week from tomorrow, 1,000 years from tomorrow. That's what we're playing for. pause and such. And I'm back sometime later and such. And so I was just thinking about how, now if I was to having to do something, I would be much more anxious and irritable than if I did it 5 hours ago. And, that whole, we have to not only fight with the fact that you have to do this translating thing, but you have to do it in that context where there's going to be, how you are, how you feel is going to make a difference, and how you react to what you have to react to, and how much patience you have, I guess, in terms of making arguments and trying to play the other people that you have to play to do whatever this communication thing is. And so yeah, there's times when it's harder to do just because you have some sort of anxiety, some sort of something else on your mind kind of thing, some more visible worry or sense of dread or something else to just put you in a less receptive mood. Less patient, more reactive, more hostile, and all of that crap. And so it just makes this even more difficult because there isn't some science to how you function in terms of you're always the same machine and you're always going to produce the same calculation when the buttons are hit. So I guess the point is you can't rely on how you will react, because how you react will be largely dependent on how much tension or stress you're under, maybe is a good way to put it. How easy or smooth your psychology is. Hard to explain all of that to people who probably don't feel that much irregularity in their mood swings, I suppose. The non-technical way to describe the variability in all of these hormones that we're floating in, our brain is floating in. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that's that important anyway, but it's just part of the nuance of trying to manage and find a way to regularize and create that Rosetta Stone of some sort that makes it possible to say, oh, can't you understand this value? So anyway, I was just thinking about, the subject can be bifurcated, into, two contexts. The context of what if it was just about humans, and we could pretend that animals don't matter and that their welfare is irrelevant, and it's, not a consideration. They were all, of some lesser machine function, like a paramecium or something. They were just a real machine, no brain, no synthetic consciousness, no illusion of being alive, and it was just about what happens to humans. Then the argument is narrowed to something about just the idea of, well, to have your fun life, there's got to be this certain number of unfun existences, and you can take those to extremes in the sense that there's some very bad experienced. What people have to experience is, almost indescribably horrific in terms of how badly they're killed, or what disease they get, and how horrible the symptoms are, and just the stuff that can happen to somebody just being, ending up homeless and, being slowly killed by attrition, exposure. And, can you really make the argument that you can do something as a having fun person that could ever compensate for the gravity of all of that bad stuff? And then again, you still have the context of, even if you're one of these having funners, the fun's going to stop. You know, you are going to be killed. And it's rare that somebody is killed. You know, the graceful death isn't the common death. You know, the quick death isn't the common death. And so unless you're advocating that, you know, everybody should do that, die quickly, you know, just to expedite this process of, you know, rebuilding the new machine to do the little happy life stuff over and over again. You know, you have to have a plan, even if that's your overview. You'd have to have some sort of, you know, statement built in, stating that, oh yeah, okay, that's really a bad thing, is for any of us to think there's any point in trying to lengthen our individual lives, because it's better for the whole class of human if the rule is everybody has to die quickly. You know, because dying slow is creating more friction, more waste in the function of this making of happy machines. It just sort of ruins the assembly line by creating this, you know, disaster of the slow, miserable death. And so what if we even got rid of the slow, miserable death? I mean, again, you're still stuck with the fact that, you know, for you to go to Disneyland, you're going to force a certain number of people to have a very unpleasant and you know, bad experience. You know, they're going to have to pay the price for it so much, the ticket, and they didn't ask to be, you know, generous, you know, and be willing to get the bad ticket so you could get the good ticket. You know, get the bad seat so you could get the good seat. You know, be, you know, born defective or dysfunctional so you could be happy existing as a better functioning fun bot. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So even if we were just thinking about this as being a commodity of sensation that was just exchanges between human beings, it's still not good enough, frankly. It's not good enough for me anyway. I mean, I certainly don't want to torture somebody else so I can be comfortable, so I can live to be happy, you know, whatever that is. You know, I mean, how much of people's happiness is derived, frankly, out of, you know, watching somebody they don't like fail. You could almost argue that most of sports is like that. You know, people have their little hero. They want their hero to have a good night. The only way their hero can have a good night is everybody else has to have a bad night. You know, that kind of crap. So a lot of people are made happy by circumstances where a good thing doesn't happen. You know, it's an intrinsically bad thing. But, you know, something you like is benefited by the bad because it gets to win the gold medal, and it wouldn't have if the bad thing didn't happen. That kind of crap. Yeah. Yeah, those are arguments anyway. Yes. Considering my condition, I'd be back though to see if I can do a little better. Alright, back. So I was thinking about the real problem of the fact that you have to learn by doing, okay, or getting, you know, and that you really don't appreciate a lot of this stuff until it happens to you. And I know I'm also guilty of that in terms of, you know, you have to bang into this thing and, you know, it has to work on you. And like I said, I wasn't a vegetarian when I was 15, and I should have been, or when I was 12 even. Took longer than that, you know, 17 or so, before I started really saying I have to do something about it. I can't just pretend I don't know when I did know. and then there's other events where, it's almost like it's not like you have to have your arm cut off to know what having no arm is like, but if you have something else diminished or taken away, it can give you an appreciation for what life is like. It's like I didn't know, somebody could say, oh, I got a bad back, and oh, I got this, and I got, and then you don't know it until it happens to you. Okay, and then you say, oh, okay, I get what they're complaining about, because this is really bad. It's like you can have headache, and then someday you end up with a migraine or something, and you start realizing that there's a whole magnitude of this that is so obnoxious and horrible, that, yeah, you'd have to pile up an awful lot of good reason to face doing it again, having it happen again. And I suppose there was a point for me, around whatever 16 or 17, where that was one of the things that was just starting to happen was I was finding no prospect that there would be any way I'd want to relive, even at 15, the experience, or 16, that I already had. I wouldn't want to do them again. And even though there were parts of life that were intriguing and interesting and fun, I wouldn't pay that price of being vulnerable to redoing those days again, or those days, or, just wouldn't want those. It's too high a price to pay. And so it's like you don't know it until, it happens to you. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, yeah, now I get it. And somebody could tell me about it. They could tell you it's not a good thing. I remember when I was a kid, I was sort of just mocking. They used to show smoking ads, where somebody has a tracheotomy, and they're still smoking through the hole in their neck, and oh, I'll never be that addicted, and then you realize, when you're lying on a cement floor, smoking a cigarette into a furnace when you have bronchitis and you can barely breathe, that, oh yeah. yeah, I would do that. That's, you might as well laugh at me, because I'm one of them. And so I guess that's part of it. You have to be, you get humbled by your existence in terms of being knocked down, and you're not going to want to make those same mistakes over and over again. So I guess it's possible for you to become, too risk averse, but it's less dangerous than being too little averse, right? Too little risk aversion is worse than too much risk aversion, and too much more dangerous for creating those kind of Holocaust events that just take too high a price to pay. So again, I could argue that you could just go through the world wars, Civil War on, and that's not even counting all the medieval wars with the, bashing each other with hammers and shit, and all kinds of terrible wounds that you slowly die of. You can't even. Is there anything that could justify or defend? Is there any possible good that could come of this that could defend any of all of that crap? All the people dying of the plague, again, so you can just figure it out. This isn't an equation you sit there and say, yeah, let's buy this. This is a good deal. It's not a good deal. This vulnerability, and again, I haven't died yet. So I don't even have one of the big pieces of the fun hasn't shown up yet. So, I'm already in a deficit. I don't think it's going to make the equation even more brilliant, to say, oh yes, let's do this again. And again, I had all kinds of advantages. In so many ways, I'm so much better off than so many. And it's miraculous that they can, swim in the sewage and, sing some winning song. Ugh. Spooky. So anyway, I guess that's enough of a a dirge. Yeah. You know, but people, they need to be conscious of that part of existence and the fact that this is just not a free lunch. And so for you to all talk about how much fun you're having and how great it is and how we have to maintain playing this moronic slowly die game, you know, your advocates, your defenders, you're promoting, you're pushing, you're almost shoving the babies out of the vaginas. You know, you're not doing sentient organisms a favor. You're not doing them any good. You're, you know, evil. You know, bad people. Okay. So, enough. So, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, this is, you know, what... It's not a complicated argument. You really think you're doing something that's worth torture and torment and pain and suffering and you know, horror. You think you are. I mean, how many people would have to get killed by a psycho killer in some horrible, you know, some slow knifed to death way, before you'd say that's too many? You know, how many victims, you know, will you tie to the back of your car? Is there a number that if you know World War III shows up? I mean, is there some magnitude that it has to have for you to concede? Oh, that probably wasn't worth letting that event. You know, living long enough to see that. Yeah. Is there any possibility that there's any amount of bad things that can happen to feeling things before you say it's too expensive? Till you say it's, you know, will you ever say no mas? Ever? I mean, it doesn't really matter how bad it gets. You'll just never say the words. All right. No, that's enough. Okay. So, till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot.